This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Ethiopia intensifies bombardment of rebel targets in Tigray region. Russian president denies state links with mercenaries reportedly headed to Mali. And Ugandan soldiers to be tried for civilian killings in Somalia. Welcome to Africa Live. You're watching Africa Live. I'm Hannah Viviers. For the latest in business news, here is Rama.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in the next half hour. South Africa is looking for cheap financing in order to phase out the coal power plants it currently relies on. And young people at this year's YouthConnekt Africa Summit are demanding greater, more detailed involvement in government policy making. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Hannah.
Thank you so much for that, Rama. Well, we begin the hour in Ethiopia, where the Air Force has launched a fifth airstrike on the rebel-held Mekelle city. The air raids targeted sites believed to be of strategic military importance. CGTN Giram Chala reports.
5 airstrikes in 4 days. The Ethiopian National Defense Force said the air raid targeted TPLF-held strategic locations. Following the latest one, the Government Communication Affairs Service issued an update, and I quote, "Another one of the terrorist group TPLF's training center has been the target of airstrikes on Friday. This site used to be the ENDF's training center before being appropriated by the TPLF to undertake military training for its illegal recruits. It is also serving as a battle network hub for the terrorist organization," end of quote. There are no reports of the number of casualties of the latest airstrikes in Mekelle and its surrounding, but unverified TPLF sources are claiming that there were civilian casualties of all the 5 airstrikes carried out so far. The government, on the other hand, is adamant the attacks from the air are well calculated and have been successfully staged, hitting their goals of destroying rebel force camps, training centers, warehouses, and so on. Sources from the military told us these airstrikes may continue in the next few days too. They will go on until what authorities say is the TPLF's withdrawal from a few locations in the Amhara and Afar regions. Similarly, fighting has resumed in the north of the country on the ground between government force and the TPLF militia. The international community, and more particularly the African Union, are pushing for a peaceful resolution of the conflict in the northern part of Ethiopia. Giram Chala, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Let's now turn to Mali. Russian President Vladimir Putin says private security firm Wagner does not represent the interests of the Russian state. His comments come on the back of ongoing reports that Mali is in talks with security firm Wagner to hire mercenaries. It's a move France has warned against, saying the hiring of mercenaries could isolate the country. Mali continues to battle not only repeated terrorist attacks, but intercommunal violence as well.
It's private business with private interests tied to extracting energy resources, including various resources like gold or precious stones. If these activities conflict with the interests of the Russian state, which unfortunately happens sometimes, then of course we must react, and we will.
In Guinea, coup leaders have named their first lineup of government ministers. The positions that have been named are for the defense, security, government, environment, and security general of the government. The officials given the posts include a former general and 3 other figures who had held positions under ousted President Alpha Condé. Since the overthrow of Condé last month, the junta has repeatedly tried to reassure investors, donors, and regional powers. They say they aim to get rid of the corrupt elite and have no plans to stay in office in the long term. AMISOM has confirmed that members of its force killed 7 civilians in Somalia. They were killed during an ambush by al-Qaeda-linked terrorists A 6-member board of inquiry looked into the matter before releasing its findings. The soldiers' actions were found to be in breach of AMISOM's rules of engagement. The African Union mission to Somalia says it takes full responsibility for what it terms as unlawful acts. It's added that the implicated soldiers, who are all Ugandan nationals, will be brought to justice. Well, Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of Nigerian separatist group, the Indigenous People of Biafra, has pleaded not guilty to charges of treason and terrorism. The charges were leveled against him by the federal government. Kanu's trial was held amid heavy security and protests. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam reports.
It's Nnamdi Kanu's day in court. Dozens of security officials have cordoned off the entrance gate to the Federal High Court in Abuja. Pandemonium breaks out as lawyers and the media are barred from entering the court's premises. That and a massive protest by supporters of the separatist group leader.
Can there be fair trial under this toxic atmosphere? I say no. With all due respect, there will be no fair trial. We're here to see and to hear. Like I said the last time, justice must not only be done, but must be seen to have been done.
The trial is being held behind closed doors. Kanu is facing 7 counts bordering on terrorism and treasonable felony, charges which he denies. His lawyer says they're baseless.
After studying the charge, we come to a conclusion that the charge is worthless and empty. So we have filed an application challenging the competency of the charge and the jurisdiction of the court to continue hearing this case.
Nnamdi Kanu allegedly declared himself leader of the Indigenous People of Biafra, IPOB, a group proscribed by the federal government. He was arrested by Interpol on June the 27th and has been in detention for 18 weeks. The court has fixed November 10 to hear his applications, questioning its jurisdiction to hear the case and the merit of the charges. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Finance ministers from the Pacific Rim grouping APEC have agreed to step up global vaccine production efforts. Talks between the 21 member economies, which include China, the US and Japan, come as COVID-19 continues to hinder the global economic recovery. Reporting from Auckland, New Zealand, here's Owen Poland.
Yes, a short time ago, finance ministers from APEC's 21 member economies wrapped up a 3-hour virtual meeting in which they met to discuss the policy actions needed to combat and respond and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as tackling things like climate change, supporting inclusive and sustainable growth, and improving the well-being of the people across the APEC economies. Now, the meeting was chaired by New Zealand's Finance Minister Grant Robertson, who says that we continue to battle the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and that the pain that it has brought to our people, our economies and our healthcare systems cannot be downplayed. Since the pandemic began, many economies have recovered much of the lost output, and real GDP is expected to grow across the region by more than 6% in 2021. But Mr. Robertson says that the recovery is far from complete because APEC economies face plenty of headwinds, including a rapid rise in public debt and demands for new spending. The downside risks for economic recovery also include the spread of new variants of COVID-19, as well as economic challenges like the ongoing supply chain disruption and increased inflation, which has emerged in recent months.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization is urging countries to prioritize vaccinating health workers. According to its new report, 115,000 healthcare workers may have died from COVID-19 as of May. The figure comes from a broader estimate of 80,000 to 180,000 deaths. Condemning global vaccine inequality and urging G20 countries to immediately fulfill vaccine sharing commitments, the WHO's Director General continues to insist that all health staff be vaccinated. According to him, less than 10% of health workers in Africa have been fully vaccinated, while the number reaches over 80% in most high-income countries. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Professor Rodney Adam. He is the Vice Chair of the Department of Pathology at the Aga Khan University Medical College here in Nairobi. Good evening, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us in Africa Live. Professor, more than 100,000 health workers are reported to have lost their lives in various parts of the world. What is the situation in Africa?
Well, the situation that I can respond to most directly is the one at Aga Khan University, where I'm intimately involved with the COVID infections, both patients from the outside and staff on the inside. And what I can say is that we have lost nobody, none of our staff members to COVID, and very few serious illnesses. So the situation is not all bad. And one of the things to remember is that many of the infections in healthcare workers actually came because they were infected outside the healthcare setting. So while there is a risk in the healthcare setting, it's not always as high as the numbers might suggest. And what we found at Aga Khan is that when our staff members have been infected, most often it's from the community and or their household. Very rarely has it been from patients. But we also have an aggressive testing policy if somebody thinks they might be ill. And we've had mask requirements from early on for all the healthcare workers and for patients who are able to wear them. And I think those things have dramatically decreased the risk to healthcare workers and to patients.
Professor, you've shared some of what Aga Khan has done to just keep those numbers pretty impressive from what you've said. What can African countries do to improve the well-being of healthcare workers and perhaps also learn from some of what you've learned in dealing with this crisis?
Yes, good question. And it would be wonderful if everybody had the resources that we have had for our own staff members. There was an aggressive move early in the pandemic to create a task force for COVID preparation and making sure we had plenty of all of the required PPE. And I'll just make a comment about that. What we're learning about COVID over the last more than a year is that it's really not spread by contact. It's spread through the air almost exclusively. So the approaches for preventing mean wearing masks, N95 when they're available, and for some settings, surgical masks are okay. That's another separate discussion. We didn't use any masks with the valves in them because they only protect the person wearing them, not the people around them. And something that's been neglected, I think, across the board is having good ventilation systems. And, you know, some of the public hospitals will decrease the risk just by opening windows, even if there is nothing more elaborate than that. So, and of course, the biggest thing that can be done is immunize the staff members. That's been an aggressive campaign on our part in Aga Khan, and we have a very high uptake rate for the immunization. Sometimes, yes, there was a bit of pressure for people to do it because we want to protect our staff members and the patients. And the best way to do that is by full immunization. So really 3 main sets of things. Vaccination is going to be by far the most effective. Provision of masks, the right kind for the right setting, and then really looking at the ventilation systems within the hospital.
Thank you so much for your input and for joining us here on Africa Live, Professor. Professor speaking to us about just some of what Aga Khan University Medical College has done here in Nairobi to keep those numbers of healthcare workers who've been infected by COVID-19 to a record low. Well, as cases of the COVID-19 Delta variant in the U.S. are reported to be on the decline, the White House says it's about to open its borders to unrestricted travel for millions of people across the world. For individuals who've been cut off from loved ones for nearly 2 years, the announcement comes as a massive relief. As for businesses struggling to survive, the resumption of cross-border trade is a lifeline. Reporting from Washington, here's Owen Fairclough.
Craftsman Juan Valencia reunited with his wife and daughters in Chile. I'm so happy. I haven't seen them for a year and 10 months. These girls have grown up and now they're different. People like Juan have been allowed to return to Chile from the US after authorities in Santiago lifted COVID-19 travel restrictions. Now it's Washington's turn to do the same as the Delta variant that sent cases rocketing this summer is brought under control. From November the 8th, the US will lift restrictions for travelers from 33 countries, including China, as well as neighboring Canada and Mexico, provided travelers have proof of full vaccination.
For the Biden administration, this is tantamount to the kind of controversial vaccine passport that Canada's government is rolling out. And among those countries for whom restrictions into the US are being lifted, there are wildly differing rates of full vaccination. For example, in Canada, it's more than 70%, but in India, it's less than half that. The White House says its focus is purely on people who are fully vaccinated, and that means for those who've had only a single dose of a 2-dose vaccine, they're excluded.
For this San Diego perfume store owner, the resumption of mostly unrestricted free movement across the US-Mexico border after 18 months is a financial lifeline.
Before closing, I have the lot I can say I like doing the more than 150,000 in a month minimum. So now I have 80,000, like 50%. And I hope now maybe when it's open, maybe I have more than 150.
The city's mayor is also counting on a restoration of trade.
The San Ysidro Chamber of Commerce has identified hundreds of businesses that have closed, they believe, directly as a result of the travel restrictions, and that's measured in millions of dollars, and that's in one neighborhood.
But for the unvaccinated, the US remains off limits for now, except for returning American citizens. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Time for us to take a short break and return to more news in Africa Live, including fuel prices and immigration top on the agenda as European leaders meet in Brussels. And Somalia appeals for humanitarian aid as drought worsens.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Restoration of China's seat in the United Nations was an epic diplomatic battle. A journey fraught with obstacles.
Yes!
Africa's support was crucial. Victory saw a new era in China-Africa ties, founded on a common future and shared prosperity.
Well, Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Let's now head over to Brussels, where the EU summit entered its second day on Friday. We're now joined by Giles Gibson, who is in Brussels. Thank you so much for being on the program, Giles. Rising energy prices and the row with Poland over the rule of law were some of the key issues being tackled at the summit. What solutions are being offered at the meeting?
Well, the sense that you really got at the end of this two-day summit here in Brussels was that European leaders are very much in agreement about the challenges that are facing the bloc over the coming months and the coming years, but they struggled to agree on exactly what the responses to those challenges should be. I mean, just take energy prices, for example. We have the European Commission pledging to explore the possibility of joint procurement of natural gas. The theory there is that they will be able to get a better price if they negotiate as one single bloc. The European Commission is also going to be establishing a strategic gas reserve, and they're going to report back before the next meeting of the European Council in the middle of December. Meanwhile, on this whole dispute over Poland and the rule of law, we heard from Emmanuel Macron, the French president, saying that they need to see concrete moves from Poland. There's been a lot of concern in recent months about, for example, the independence of the judiciary in Poland after the government there brought in some controversial reforms. Take a listen to German Chancellor Angela Merkel talking about this standoff with Poland as well.
There is the issue of the independence of justice, but underlying this, and this was also discussed yesterday, there should be a complete separate discussion on this. Where do we actually see the European Union heading? What should be the European competence, and what should be tackled by nation states? And I can understand well, if you look at Polish history, the question of what constitutes our national identity in times when we can now live in peace and freedom plays a major role.
Now, the European Commission has vowed that there will be some sort of response to a recent court ruling in Poland, which said that the EU law does not take primacy over certain parts of the Polish constitution, which has really triggered a furious reaction here in Brussels. But the European Commission, even after this two-day meeting, is still just weighing up its options for its next move.
So, Giles, what we also know is that European leaders were also seeking a compromise on the often emotive issue on migration. What's the latest on that?
Yeah, once again, we really just saw a split between different European leaders about what their response to rising levels of undocumented migrants coming into the east of the European Union in particular. This is countries such as Poland and Latvia and Lithuania. The accusation is that the government in Belarus has been flying migrants in from the Middle East and then assisting them to the border. That's an accusation that the Belarusian president, Alexander Lukashenko, denies, by the way. We had a proposal at this summit from Lithuania's president talking about building some sort of a physical fence or a border wall on the eastern frontier of the European Union. That got short shrift from the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who said that as far as the Commission is concerned, they don't want to see funding of barbed wire or walls. And just finally, it's worth noting that assuming the German political parties can negotiate a new coalition in the country before the next European Council meeting, which is coming up in the middle of December, then this is actually German Chancellor Angela Merkel's 107th and final EU summit as she prepares to step down. She got a tribute from Charles Michel, the European Council President, saying that an EU summit without Angela Merkel is like Paris without the Eiffel Tower. And she was also sent a special video tribute from former US President Barack Obama.
Thank you so much for all that, Giles. Giles Gibson speaking to us from Brussels. Well, the U.S. House has voted to refer Steve Bannon, the one-time advisor to former President Donald Trump, to the Justice Department for criminal prosecution. The resolution was adopted in a largely party-line vote of 229 to 202. It accuses Bannon of contempt of Congress over his refusal to cooperate with the investigation into the January 6th Capitol riot. 9 Republicans sided with all Democrats. The matter next goes to Justice Department Attorney General Merrick Garland will make the final decision on whether to prosecute. Independent current affairs commentator Einar Tangent shares his views on the case.
This is just the beginning. They requested his testimony. They gave him a subpoena. He is choosing to ignore it. He says because Donald Trump has executive privilege. But there's very little on the line for Bannon. It gives him actually a platform by saying that not much on the line. Most he can get is about a year in jail and $100,000 fine. He's facing much more serious charges in terms of fraud in connection with a nonprofit that he started that it is alleged he siphoned funds from. And right now, to decode it, the issue is that Steve Bannon seemed to know about what was going to happen on January 6th before the events themselves. And they're trying to get to the bottom of whether or not he was talking to the president and the president was aware that there was going to be some sort of insurrection activities on that day. If they do get that, there will be serious consequences, criminal ones, that will be not by the Congress, but by the Justice Department itself. So this is an investigation. They're trying to get testimony. If they fail to get testimony, it is a toothless committee because they will not be able to render any dispositive statement on what happened, and their investigation will come to an end.
Libya's prime minister and several foreign powers have finally endorsed the holding of a national election on December the 24th. Since July, several warring parties could not agree on a roadmap for the elections. The polls aim to resolve years of turmoil and division in the North African country and create a new political leadership whose legitimacy is widely accepted. Prime Minister Abdulhamid Dbeibah made the announcement in Tripoli at a joint news conference with the Foreign Minister of Kuwait. The final communique on the elections included foreign ministers from France, Italy, US, as well as Arab states and UN officials.
The importance of taking the necessary measures to build confidence and create an appropriate environment in order to hold the national elections in a fair, transparent and inclusive manner on the 24th of December 2021. 6. Ending the conflict, achieving security and stability in Libya as a basis for establishing peace and building the state for peaceful coexistence and advancing the economy and development.
We all affirm our support for the initiative to support the stability of Libya, and we will not fail in this place to commend the efforts of the Joint Military Commission 5+5 by approving the plan of action for the expulsion of mercenaries, foreign fighters and foreign forces from Libya in a gradual and balanced manner and in phases.
In Somalia, Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble has appealed to international donors, aid agencies, and the Somali public to help the government to assist those who have been seriously affected by the worsening drought in the country. Currently, 5.9 million people need assistance in the worst hit areas. Many have already lost their animals or are at risk of dying of starvation. Authorities fear that conditions could worsen due to the limited rainfall projected throughout the country in coming months.
Today, we would like to start an emergency response to save the lives of our brothers who face severe drought in the regions of Jubaland State. I pray to God that He eases the burden of the drought from those who are affected. We should be able to deliver aid possibly by tomorrow or the day after. I would also like to appeal to the UN agencies and the international community to urgently help those who are affected by the drought in Jubaland State areas.
Somalia's government is fragile and will not be able to offer much assistance in this situation. It faces a lot of constraints. The economic challenge is a major one. I'll advise the Somali government to empower its Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. The minister should be able to deliver a constant report. The issue of the drought should always be a hot topic.
Meanwhile, over in Zimbabwe, after a series of successful droughts that have compromised food security in the past years, the country's fortunes are turning around. Zimbabwe has recorded a good harvest in the 2020 to 2021 season. The developments have slashed the country's import bill by $300 million, as many millers are now able to meet local demand. Notula Shabalala has more.
Zimbabwe's maize reserves are advancing towards a projected 2.8 million tons following a good harvest. Millers of maize and other grains who once felt the pinch of failing to meet local demand due to droughts are now getting back on their feet.
We can plan beyond 12 months. Previously, we used to have one to 2 months cover. And that has been very difficult in terms of planning, in terms of committing to customers and ensuring that the market is well provided for. But also equally, in terms of labor, we were unable to guarantee tenure or employment beyond the cover that we had.
More grain deliveries are being recorded across the country compared to previous farming seasons. But Zimbabwe's Grain Marketing Board says farmers need to be financially and technically supported to contribute to the nation food basket.
Next year we are expecting, all things being equal, 3.6 million metric tons of maize, according to our projections. And also to ensure that we get funding on time and pay our farmers on time, makes the farmers happy and they deliver to GMB. Give them a good price, farmers are ready to grow and improve on production.
The millers have felt the impact of climate change, and with the help from government, they need to adopt climate-smart agriculture for a greater grain yield.
We are not spared as Zimbabwe by this scourge of climate change effects and variability. So we need to adapt lest we die, hence our thrust and ploy to climate-proof agriculture through irrigation, rehabilitation and development.
To support the commercial grain farmers, government has targeted 1.5 million households this year. They are expected to plant 280,000 hectares of maize under a conservation agriculture scheme. Noktula Shabalala, CGTN.
Such good news for Zimbabwe and that economy. And on that note, here's Rama with the latest in business.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Here's what's coming up in business news. South Africa is looking for cheap financing in order to power its move away from coal-generated power. And young people at this year's YouthConnekt Africa Summit is demanding greater involvement in policy making.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads, where opportunity meets innovation, where profitable new markets collide with global trends. From the sound of an African bell on a stock market's floor, to the shout of the trader in a bustling free market. It's colorful, vibrant, and exotic. CGTN stands at the gateway to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. From Morocco to South Africa, we talk to the deal makers and actors who fuel its engines of growth. Only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's start in South Africa. The country is looking for cheap financing for its electricity infrastructure. A senior official in the presidency says over $27 billion is being sought as part of plans to move away from coal. Currently, over 80% of the country's electricity comes from burning thermal coal. That makes it the world's 12th biggest carbon emitter. The state power company Eskom says it's looking for up to $12 billion from global lenders to fund this transition. Young people across Africa are demanding that governments involve them in a more granular level in decision making. That at least is a message from this year's edition of the YouthConnekt Africa Summit in Ghana. They also want opportunities to deal with the high unemployment so that they can play their role in the continent's development. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra.
It's a gathering of young people from Africa as Ghana hosts the 4th annual YouthConnekt Africa Summit in Accra. More than 2,000 young people from the continent have come here to make their voices heard.
I feel like after the pandemic, this is a new experience, this is a new time for us to take over from the leadership to business, and such summits are critical to give us the platform to address these issues.
The summit like this is very important because it empowers the youth, the African energies, so that we can develop solutions for ourselves.
We have a lot as Africans, so we can do a lot from our continent. We don't have to look at the aid that comes in all the time. We can use agriculture, we can use the trade in Africa alone without even thinking about the foreign things that come in. We can get a lot of foreign exchange within ourselves.
The United Nations says Africa has the youngest population in the world, but the continent has yet to harness the full potential of its youth in socio-economic development. Rwanda's President Paul Kagame launched the YouthConnekt Africa Summit in 2012 to empower young people across Africa.
No one needs to tell us that mass unemployment in Africa, especially amongst her youth, is a ticking time bomb. The so-called Arab Spring showed clearly that the lack of employment opportunities can undermine social cohesion and political stability.
Analysts want opportunities to be created for young people to take part in the operation of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which aims to boost intra-African trade. They believe this can help reduce unemployment among the youth.
Trade agreements are not about the past. Trade agreements are about the future. And that is why in the implementation of this agreement, the youth has to be at the heart. With the AfCFTA as an anchor, entrepreneurship is a key driver of economic growth, as it will enable young people to participate in the economy of Africa, thereby creating jobs.
Governments in Africa have also been urged to treat young people as partners for development. While there are concerns from campaign groups that the perspectives of young people in Africa are largely absent in decision-making, especially in policies that affect them, the youth here hope events like this can help create a positive change. And they hope this summit will not just be a talk shop, but one that will be backed by actions. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Tunisia's national carrier, Tunisair, has seen its turnover fall by about a third due to the COVID-19 pandemic. It's now negotiating with local banks in order to reschedule its debts. This is amounted to about $782 million in the last 12 years alone. The airline's expecting its activity to resume to get back to at least a pre-pandemic level next year, with the lifting of health restrictions and the exit of Tunisia from red lists of high-risk COVID countries.
Tunisair is facing unprecedented financial difficulties. However, the company needs the state guarantee to convince local banks to reschedule its debt.
The national carrier's financial difficulties continue. It's reached the deadline for loan repayment. The banks were flexible, but now they need their money. The state must intervene again and provide guarantees so that banks reschedule the debt repayment and order a new grace period.
The Secretary General of Tunisair Executives Union added that 2020 was the worst year in the history of the national carrier. The coronavirus pandemic grounded the airlines in Tunisia and the world.
Tunisair has structural problems, but the situation worsened in 2020 due to the COVID-19 crisis. The company has suffered losses up to 70% compared to 2019. The revenues dropped by 70% as well. The negative repercussions plunged the airline into a crisis, but recovery is still possible next year. We hope to resume normal activity and turn a profit by the end of the pandemic. Tunisair needs more planes and liquidity.
The Minister of Transport said that his department is developing a new plan in order to save the national carrier.
The Transport Department will open all pending files and reveal the state strategy as soon as possible in order to better manage all state-owned companies and enterprises.
According to the Transport Department, a salvage plan for Tunisair will be finalized in the fourth quarter of 2021. The company's balance sheet was positive before 2010, with a total reserve of about $177 million. Tunisair has a fleet of 29 aircraft, but only 18 aircraft can be put back in service after maintenance, while the rest are out of service. Aviation experts say the national carrier needs to streamline its profitability until business travel returns to normal after the pandemic. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Now, of course, it's a pretty tough period for any country that's trying to recover from the economic downturn caused by the COVID pandemic and the latest global energy issues as well. Egypt's government has now rolled out a range of measures to support local businesses and to help them grow amidst all this economic volatility at home and abroad. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has that report.
The government's set of incentives has mainly targeted the manufacturing sector. A crucial element is freezing electricity prices and subsidizing all energy costs for industrialists in the next few years to protect them from the looming global energy crisis.
This will be very encouraging for investors and comforting too, as energy prices constitute 30 to 40% of the cost of production for many industries. So freezing energy prices for 5 years creates stability and a positive climate for businesses, especially in that energy prices globally are increasing rapidly.
Special significance has been given to the African market, but a lot more needs to be done. Sharif El-Gabali, whose factories export fertilizers and chemical products in the continent, for instance, says support is needed to tackle the various challenges facing exporters.
African markets require a unique approach. There must be a physical presence in African countries. There must be logistical centers established by the state in various countries. Shipping and transport routes have to improve. Shipping lines are still not regular. Money transfer to some African countries are still a challenge, while in others are fine. Every country has its unique culture, and we should learn how to approach the different cultures. We cannot consider Africa as one market.
He welcomed the new incentives that include 80% subsidies on shipping costs, tax cuts for those exporting to the rest of the continent, and a state-owned holding company to market Egyptian products to the African markets.
Egypt has huge potential to export to Africa, whether in the engineering industries, agricultural products, electrical products, chemicals, and construction material. Our role is to open the door for the Egyptian products in the African markets. We only deliver 1% of Africa's needs, which is about $4 billion. We have an ambitious plan to reach tenfold this amount in the next 5 years.
The government is also giving special attention to local car assembly plants in its incentive scheme. Proper infrastructure at no cost, tax exemptions, and logistical support will be offered for companies that produce excess of 10,000 cars annually, using at least 45% local components. The incentives program will cost the budget an upwards of $4 billion, but the government says on the long term it will help manufacturers grow, exports increase, create more jobs, and then bring in more tax revenue and attract foreign investments to the North African country. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
One last story for you, back to South Africa this time. The city of Cape Town has started exploring the use of floating solar panel arrays as a potential source of renewable energy feeding into the grid. Now, a floating solar panel array was actually deployed at one of the city's wastewater treatment facilities. It'll be used to test not just the amount of energy that is generated, but also how much it saves in terms of reducing water evaporation. CGTN's Travis Andrews has the details.
Floating solar technology has often been touted as an answer to Africa's energy and agricultural needs. Now the city of Cape Town has begun exploring that idea with the launch of its first floating solar pilot project. The city has begun testing the floating solar technology at one of its many wastewater treatment plants.
We know it is so expensive to get the land, in this vacant land in the city of Cape Town. So we are exploring other options like using the floating solar. So what we are hoping to achieve is the information that we would love to get in order for us to be able to make informed decision when we have to launch this now at a bigger scale.
The energy and evaporation savings is being monitored and being tested against a ground-based solar installation. Floating solar panels produce more energy when they are cooler, and that combined with a reduction in evaporation levels means it's a potential solution for water scarcity.
The Water Technologies Demonstration Program look at is identifying innovative and sustainable solutions that can address some of the pressing challenges experienced in our water and sanitation space. So the Water Technologies Demonstration Program selected the floating solar PV system.
The city of Cape Town hopes to secure over 300 megawatts of renewable energy by 2030. And they're hoping the results of this project ends up being favorable because they have enough capacity to roll this technology out on a large scale. With a number of dams and wastewater treatment facilities, the floating solar installation is a practical solution and has already shown to work in the agricultural industry.
We have done a similar design, just on a much larger scale, in the agricultural industry in Southern Africa, and we do believe it's the largest in South Africa to date. And the purpose of it was to firstly reduce the electricity tariffs that it was in the agriculture industry that they were paying, and at the same time we prevented the water from evaporating from the dam.
For now, the data collected from the project is set to inform future designs of larger utility-scale floating solar projects, which will be awarded through a competitive bidding process over the next few years. Nnamdi News, CGTN, Cape Town.
I'll leave you there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour for Global Business. We'll be going back to South Africa, the continent's most industrialized economy. We'll be exploring discussions that are ongoing with wealthy nations from the G20 to accelerate the country's shift away from coal. Details on that and plenty more at the top of the hour. See you then. For now, back to Hannah.
We're looking forward to that, Rama. We'll see you in a bit. Let's now take a short break and return more on Africa Live, including we tell you why a new digital exhibition format is exciting art lovers in South Africa.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanu, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Well, as more and more public spaces open in South Africa, the Kirstenbosch National Botanical Garden in Cape Town is taking part in an entirely new kind of contemporary art experience, an augmented reality art exhibition in botanical gardens across the globe called the Seeing the Invisible exhibition. It is aimed at bridging the gap between the physical and digital world to create new exhibition format. Renee Del Carme has more.
The augmented reality art exhibition, called Seeing the Invisible, takes curated art pieces beyond the typical museum or gallery space into botanical garden settings in 6 countries around the world. Kirstenbosch National Botanical Garden will display 13 virtual artworks by internationally acclaimed artists.
It just tells us that, the world of artificial intelligence is upon us. And this is a clear display of that beauty of technology, that through technology we can see just such an amazing thing and actually experience something that is experienced by other countries all over the world.
Visitors at Kirstenbosch can access the artwork through the Seeing the Invisible app on their smartphones or tablets. And they can bring along their headphones or earphones to enhance the experience of this unique art exhibition.
And through the GPRS technology, you are able to walk with your mobile device. It shows you on your mobile device the map. You go to the particular exhibition, place your mobile device there, and the art will pop up. And also you get to interact with this augmented reality art piece.
Kirstenbosch Garden says the innovative exhibition has so far been greeted with much excitement.
You know, individuals are taking pictures, uploading them on social media and sharing it with their friends and families. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. So we'd like to invite everybody to come into the garden. It's a safe space, it's open. You are breathing fresh, nice air outside in a beautiful botanical garden. And all you have to do is just, you know, maintain your social distancing, grab your digital device and be able to experience this beautiful augmented reality art exhibition.
I simply love the art exhibition. It gives you another level of wonderment. Because let's face it, the garden is already stunning and beautiful, and then you get to go through the garden and see these things through a virtual reality, but it's also in your reality.
And what is to me wonderful, it was created by someone on the other side of the earth, and here in my own local Kirstenbosch garden, I can see this. It brings across the idea of art which unites people right across the world and which unites people with nature.
The Seeing the Invisible art exhibition will run at Kirstenbosch Garden until August 2022. Renee Dalkalm, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
In sport, we begin with football and the raging debate over the proposal to stage a FIFA World Cup every 2 years. CAF President Patrice Motsepe has backed calls to stage the global football showpiece every 2 years. He says it could be an opportunity for Africa to benefit financially while strengthening the sport on the continent. Motsepe was in Ghana for a 2-day visit. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra.
It's the CAF president's first visit to Ghana since he was elected into office in March. Patrice Motsepe took over the running of African football from Ahmed after he was banned for a corruption scandal for 2 years. He says he wants to restore the image of the continent's football governing body.
PricewaterhouseCoopers report found that there's been a lot of irregular agreements, irregular contracts, and we're dealing with those issues. I'm confident that, as I said, over time, because we've got these legal cases that has to follow the legal process, but and of course we've got these agreements that have limitations on us and that we are dealing with. But I'm confident, as I said, over time, African football will be in a much, much better position.
While Motsepe hopes to regain confidence in Africa's football, he wants to also attract corporate investments for the sport. With plans to introduce a Super League in Africa, he is also supporting calls for the World Cup to be played every 2 years instead of 4 years.
Side by side with the Super League is to have the World Cup every 2 years. Having the World Cup every 2 years, and there are discussions underway, and we are allowing that study to proceed, but we must understand that African football will never be able to compete against the best in the world if it isn't put in a significantly better financial position.
Critics of plans to hold a World Cup every 2 years say it's only about money and will further contest the football fixture calendar. However, football administrators in Ghana have high expectations of Motsepe's tenure as CAF's president.
He represents exactly what we also think about football. Because to develop football at that level, you need to start from the youth. And he also believes in that. It's the reason why he's made personal commitment of $10 million into school football in Africa.
Patrice Motsepe says he wants to revive the credibility in the management of African football. While no African team has ever reached the World Cup semi-finals, Motsepe hopes to position the continent's football to be more competitive across the world. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Well, we go all the way to East Africa, where a new constitution in Kenya for the country's troubled cricket national body was passed as amendments in Nairobi on Friday. This clears the path to elections for Cricket Kenya to usher in new office. The chairperson of the government-appointed Cricket Normalization Committee, retired Lady Justice Joyce Elliott, has hailed the development as a huge milestone.
Worked very, very hard. Even just in this room where we are today, we left this room yesterday. It's about 7:30 p.m. And prior to that, we had been, the same day, we had been at Kasarani. So we have given it all that we could. We given it attention with a lot of passion. And I want to assure you that the points that have come up, what you have raised, that's why the Constitution is being adopted with amendments. We are going to look at the amendments because we start our meetings normally at 8 a.m.
It is within your hands today to make a choice that we want to continue to be part of the family of nations that benefit from the ICC, or we want to isolate ourselves into oblivion. And to be quite honest, the world will continue without Kenya. It has continued in the past few years without Kenya. It will continue to do so. And it's my appeal today that if we are men and women of good conscience, we must say Kenya must be part of the family of cricket nations.
Well, the English Premier League continues tonight with Arsenal hosting Aston Villa at the Emirates. But the biggest fixture of the weekend will be the derby between arch rivals Manchester United and Liverpool at Old Trafford on Sunday. Speaking on Friday, United manager Ole Gunnar Solskjaer said he would always back Cristiano Ronaldo, but conceded that Liverpool forward Mohamed Salah is in the form of his